it does work. It improves. It takes the good and makes them better, and it takes the people who have problems and makes them okay.
We've all had our share of pain. Whether it's physical or emotional, our body sends us signals, feelings of discomfort to indicate that something might be wrong. When this occurs, you've probably tried the usual over-the-counter interdictions, but what happens when the pain persists and you feel like you've got nowhere to turn? Welcome to the most exciting adventure of your life. Welcome to a new way of living, and welcome to the Fierce Planet Adventures podcast.
Hi, I'm Casey.
And I'm Andy, and we're on a mission to inspire and guide 1 million people to live a life of purpose, passion, and self-mastery, leveraging the 5 mountains of cutting-edge human development to build extreme mental fitness.
Today's guest, Dr. Jack Ginsberg, is joining us for the second time, and we are very excited to have you and continue our discussion on heart rate variability. And we typically start off by asking what you're most excited about right now, but I guess what's most exciting that's happened for you since we last spoke?
Yeah, other than the chance to be on this podcast?
Well, yeah, obviously.
Well, I was on the program of a professional meeting in March, and still trying to getting this message out about heart rate variability, how it relates to both normal successful adaptation and how it is associated with pathological states, including chronic pain, anxiety, depression, and PTSD. And it was exciting in the sense that there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. These live presentations and networking with professionals is another opportunity to reaffirm the significance of this particular area and this particular topic. When I started about 20 years ago, it was really a sidelight. And it's exciting to me even now in a dynamic, very immediate sense to see the wheel turning and rolling and see it growing more and more, such as this podcast is. And so while that's not so specific, it's just a general outlook right now that, I really think we're on the right track and going in the right direction. And the momentum that's being carried forward just generates so much excitement and enthusiasm for me. So I'd have to say that's always in the back of my mind.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. So Jack, the last time you were on, we did a deep dive into heart rate variability. And, for our listeners who may have maybe not remembering or have missed that podcast, could you do a quick recap and explain what HRV is?
Yes, sure. And I'm going to ask you all to help me here, because sometimes I get a little bit technical and over the top. And so I do want to keep it at a way, at a pitch that is understandable and is useful to the general audience. Heart rate variability, abbreviated as HRV, is a natural and healthy phenomenon. It is built on the relationship between breathing and heart rate. And although there's more to it than that, at its most easily grasped level, it's how your breathing is related to your heart. And, if you breathe regularly, you will generate a pattern of heart rate variability. The simplest thing to understand is that more heart rate variability, if it's in a healthy pattern, is good. We want our heart to vary in the pulse rate. Now, we measure pulse. If you think about in the clinic, when a nurse puts 2 fingers on your wrist, or however else pulse is measured, we think of heart rate as being an average, beats per minute. Mm-hmm. But now, if we think about beats per minute, you can generate that in 2 different ways. If we have 60 beats per minute, we could have 60 beats equally separated by 1 second, and that would average to 60. Or we could have a pattern of increasing and decreasing. So let's say we go 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, and 65. That would average to 60 beats per minute. The latter is healthy heart rate variability. Your heart is going through increasing and decreasing pulse rates, the space or time in between pulses. That is normal, that's good, and that is related to respiration. So if you're breathing normally at about 15 breaths per minute, your heart, a normal heart, could be varying in a regular pattern of increasing and decreasing between, just to use for example, 55 and 65 beats per minute, averaging 60. If we slow down our breath, breathe deeply, increase the inhalation exhalation cycles so that now we're breathing only 6 times per minute, that max to min of your heart rate around a central mean will increase. So it might now go from 50 to 70. That would be more heart rate variability because you have a wider range of beats, and that is better for your health. That means that your physiology, your autonomic system is more robust. The interplay between heart rate acceleration and heart rate deceleration on a beat by beat, not averaged over a minute, but beat to beat, where each beat may take 1 second, a little bit more than a second, a little bit less than a second. That average of 60, that is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So think of it like kind of 2 pistons putting in into a cylinder, injecting. One injects the heart and raises the heart rate for about 5 seconds. Then the other piston comes along, puts the decelerating, these are neurotransmitters. So we interplay between epinephrine or adrenaline, which comes directly onto the heart, increases the rate, and then we put on the acetylcholine, and that slows the heart down. And it's this interplay back and forth, one injection increasing, followed by another injection. These are neurotransmitters directly onto heart tissue, slows it down. And that is a direct function of respiration, how fast you breathe and how deep you breathe. So we can increase heart rate variability by controlling our breath. The slower we breathe, the deeper we breathe on inhalation and exhalation, the wider is that range between your slow heart rates and your high heart rates, all around some mean, some average of the max and the min. That's a healthy heart.
So for our folks listening at home, would it be fair, at least in general terms, if somebody has a heart rate monitor on their watch, monitor the heartbeat or heartbeat rate on the inhalation, and then, or is that not?
Typically not, because
Okay.
typically the wearables, so-called, will average over some time unit. They don't generally record or monitor beat to beat, pulse to pulse. They generally average over some unit of time. So to see the actual operation of heart rate variability, you need a monitor that will record and allow you to see, to visualize each beat, how, and as at the same time is recording or measuring the time in milliseconds in between each beat. So it's a little more sophisticated than what most wearables will actually monitor or record, although the equipment to do basic heart rate variability monitoring is relatively inexpensive, and the technology is very advanced. Now, that's not to say that wearables do not or cannot give you cannot report a certain heart rate variability score. Some of them do, but it's unclear how that is being recorded. I think, for example, a pulse rate oximeter. You can get HRV out of a pulse rate oximeter, which is in the hospital, because it will record each and every beat. So if you have a wearable that has the same sampling frequency, it's sampling your heart rate on a millisecond, it's actually, it needs to be at about 1,000 samples per second. You have to break a second down into milliseconds in order to record heart rate. So the technology is relatively common. And some wearables, it may be that some very high-end wearables have the same recording ability that a pulse oximeter does in the hospital, but that's what it would take.
Gotcha. Okay.
Does that clarify there? Because it's easy to measure. You can measure how many pulses there that occur in, say, 5 seconds, but that's not telling you what the space between each interval is. If you have a device that will record the time unit in between each beat, you can derive heart rate variability from that.
All right. Great explanation. Thank you.
Thank you for re-explaining that, or giving us a recap there.
Yeah, it's hard to simplify beyond this, to a certain point, but it is important because, again, that's another reflection of how heart rate variability and its association with well-being have really burgeoned and clearly are in a commercial market, and not typically wearables are not used for clinical populations. They're really used for athletic training and for general well-being, for people who want to measure their sleep and their number of steps, and there's quite often a heart rate variability function in that, but maybe not. So they are not designed to collect the data that's needed to report what heart rate variability is. And I got to tell you too, there's a lot of data involved, and a lot of these wearable devices just don't have the storage space. Yeah. You can't get a reliable heart rate variability measure. The rule of thumb is 10 minutes. You need 10 minutes of IBI recording, pulse to pulse recording, in order to do the mathematical transformations that gives you a reliable heart rate variability score for those 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's, I think for maybe for your average everyday person, that's maybe a little bit out of reach. So I think there are folks, there are groups that will, help you determine your heart rate variability. Where would somebody go to find something like that?
Oh, just look online, just Google it.
Just Google.
And well, right. I don't want
the mighty
to
Google.
Well, it's really true. I don't want to oversimplify it, and I don't want to endorse any products. But I can tell you that there are several on the market which have a fingertip recorder or an earlobe recorder, as opposed to something which is strapped onto the wrist, as well as at a slightly higher level, there are easily available commercial devices which are actually ECGs. They're actually heart rate monitors that you can strap on to your chest, and it will record each and every heartbeat, the time unit between each and every heartbeat. You would then export that data into a software program and do the calculations, which the software program will do for you, and that will give you your HRV. But the ECGs are really more clinical and research-based, but the fingertip PPG systems, there are several out there, will give, and you need a laptop computer in order to have the feedback as well as the software that's built in to do it. So generally speaking, the minimum for a reliable HRV measure is not really a wearable. It's a fingertip or earlobe sensor that goes into a laptop computer that has a software program that can read that data, the input data from the fingertip or earlobe where the pulse is, and then calculate. You have to do several transformations of the data. So that would be the place to begin. There are some newer systems that will where you can have. So the question is whether it's ambulatory or not. Really, the issue of recording HRV is whether it's really a laboratory or clinic-based versus ambulatory and everyday sort of, everyday And it's been hard to get that level of discrimination into a teeny tiny monitor that goes on your wrist.
Sure.
That's not to say they don't do it. And, I'm a little bit skeptical, frankly, but I don't want to dismiss it because if you just are doing intrapersonal, just your own scores,
Mhm.
the absolute number may not be as important as relative changes.
Mhm.
So if you were to do HRV recordings with a wearable, same time, under same conditions, then you could do a comparison and you could kind of see, am I doing okay or not? Because you're using the same device and you're kind of controlling or holding steady what the conditions are that you're recording under. So
Mhm.
it's simple, but not that simple.
Great. So
So-
is there,
oh,
go ahead,
go ahead.
Casey. Nope, you go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask is there, and I think you actually answered this already, but my question was, or is there a situation where somebody might want to monitor their HRV at home? I mean, what benefit might that bring?
Well, certainly. And the equipment that I was describing before that has the external sensors, an input sensor, and a software program that goes onto a laptop type computer. Those systems are easily run by individuals. So you can definitely run a monitor of your own heart rate variability. Why would you do that? Well, one would be just to monitor your own physiology and become more aware. And that's really at the border of heart rate variability biofeedback.
Mhm.
That's the reason that typically a person would monitor their own heart rate variability. Because as I mentioned, you get the maximum HRV when you're breathing slowly. And so you would want to practice with this type of system where you can see your own heart rate variability. You're getting feedback. And that's where the term HRV biofeedback comes from. You're actually seeing what the monitor is telling you is your heart rate and the conversion to heart rate variability. The more you do that, the more awareness is created of what your internal physiological state is. Sooner or later, with enough practice, it becomes automatic. And you no longer need the visual feedback in
Mhm.
order to create, so to speak, or go into this physiological state that we call coherence when your heart rate variability has been maximized. And so you practice the deep breathing, you begin to feel what it feels like, you become aware of your heart rate. Typically, people are not aware if their heart is beating fast or slow or regular. And it's a way of training yourself into learning how to create physiological coherence or this improved state. So you practice it. That's one reason why, because you can get the feedback immediate and long term. An HRV biofeedback session that an individual would run on themselves without a trained coach, probably 20 minutes worth in front of the computer, continuous monitoring. That's why you would do it. And until you learn and appreciate and enjoy the benefits of what this heart rate variability is when it comes from slow, regular, deep breathing.
Got it.
It's pretty cool, isn't it?
It is.
For so, I mean, when this thing got rolling, it seemed so gimmicky. It seemed so hard to believe there could be such potent effects with simple and pretty quick, relatively fast intervention or doing something. It could be so helpful. And I think it's been dismissed. I think a lot of the resistance or the lack of understanding is because it sounds so simple. It's so basic, but it's really true. And you can see it if you get one of these systems. So you want to Google something like HRV biofeedback system. They're easily acquired. You don't have to buy the laptop. You just have to get the sensor and the software. It's around $300. And
Not bad.
Not bad is really right. I would be reluctant to endorse any system that is less complicated or less expensive than that as really being useful for the biofeedback part of it. So let's distinguish between HRV monitoring, which is a good thing, and biofeedback, which is a conscious self-control intervention. Biofeedback is an intervention. The HRV that you would get from a wearable or any other system is just monitoring. It's just recording it. And so you're not doing what you need to be doing to make a difference. You could do it. You could take a wearable and look at an HRV score and then do your biofeedback. And I mean, if you wanted to look at your wearable for 15 minutes straight and do your slow, deep breathing, you probably could pick up a difference in your HRV score. If you looked at your wearable continuously for 10 minutes while you did slow, deep breathing, I think you could probably see a change for the better of your heart rate variability. We haven't done it. I think that'd be a great sort of a report on that, is how can you do biofeedback with a wearable? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that, at least the one that I've got probably isn't detailed enough to do that.
Probably not, because you can't see, you need to be able to see an output of each individual pulse. That's the key to it. The key is it's not just you have to see each individual pulse. It has to be recorded. And these other software systems I'm describing that go on laptops, they give you graph after graph after graph, which is showing each beat as it occurs over, say, a 10-minute time period. And it's graphing the time, the IBI, the time in between each beat on the y-axis, and just a continuous flow of time on the X. So you can see how your heart rate varies with each beat. That's the sinusoidal pattern. That's this idea of respiratory sinus arrhythmia, meaning that if you're breathing regularly, you're going to have some increase and decrease on a regular basis, according to whatever your respiratory cycle is. You slow down your cycle, and that beat to beat increase, that sinus wave will increase the max and min.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I think the only wearable that comes close is a lot more expensive than the computer system you were talking
Well,
about.
then either, that's right. It's clinic and research.
Yeah.
But when I started out on this, we had an ECG that had a one of these little tapes. And so you would actually measure with a ruler, you'd measure the distance, and these little ticker tape sort of things, they're measured in tenths of seconds. And so you would count the number of little boxes in between each peak, each PQRST complex. And that would give you your IBI from beat to beat. And you do that 100 times, which could be, as many as maybe 5 or 10 minutes worth. And from that, you would then feed it. And so if you see how rapidly, how dramatically the technology has advanced, where a person can get into fairly detailed recordings with really no training or background and without expensive equipment.
Oh, that's incredible. What I find really interesting is you were telling us a little bit about how HRV, HRVB is actually being used in research now to help with chronic pain. And I don't know, we'll let you take it from here, but
Okay.
Do we need to have a basic understanding of how pain occurs or what's going on there to understand how this works? When I think about energy and vitality, I think about a kid. They have the energy to play, run around, climb things. That energy that feels like you just can't contain yourself. It's the stuff we've always wished they could just bottle up and sell to us, right? Well, this company's found a way to do just that. Amari's Happy Juice Pack. Mood, motivation, energy, things our bodies can naturally produce when both our guts and our brains are happy and communicating. And we can actually improve that process of communication across the axis of the gut and the brain. This is cutting-edge science. This is game-changing information. This is where science meets soul. This is Amari, and we're helping people feel better naturally. Boost your serotonin and GABA. Balance your neurotransmitters. Nourish your gut. The things that make you want to do. Start feeling better the natural way. Check out the links in the show notes for discounts and more information.
Right, that would help. The reason that research protocols are being funded is because there is a mechanism. And so when you write the grant proposal and ask for money, you explain why it is you believe that an HRVB intervention would help, in this case, some kind of chronic pain. There has to be an understanding or a mechanism of it. So the protocols that are going on now and that I've been a part of, where HRVB was an intervention to reduce pain in veterans, uh, showed quite significant clinical and statistical effects in terms of increase in HRV and decrease in self-reported pain symptoms in depression, anxiety, cognition, um, pain interference in daily life, using all standardized measures. So the basic design of a research protocol, a clinical trial, which involves an intervention in two groups and a pre and post measure. So you have two groups, one where they get the real HRVB, the coaching, the training on breathing over a period of, let's say, 6 weeks. And then there's a pre and a post assessment of their pain symptoms, their cognition, their pain interference with life, depression, and anxiety. And you do the same test battery at the end of the intervention. And of course, you're measuring HRV as well. And you look at the post and compare that to the pre. It's that simple in a pre-post design. And you look to see if there's improvement. At the same time, you're running the same protocol or the same procedure in a control group, which has the same kind of pain to begin with, but they don't get the HRVB. And then you compare the two groups at the end. So you compare the intervention group pre and post to see if they're better. And then you compare the intervention group with the control group, and you see if they're better than the control group improved at the end. The data are showing that the control groups typically don't improve very much, if at all, whereas the HRVB intervention group certainly improves relative to itself at the beginning and relative to the control group at the end of the intervention. That's the design. And a couple of studies, including our own from the VA, have demonstrated this, are showing this. And these are all relatively recent, and it's coming out now, because to do a clinical trial takes several years. It takes a couple of years in the proposal stage, and then you get the money, and then you run the test, and then it takes a little while afterwards. So the time lag between developing a protocol to do HRVB intervention in chronic pain is in the order of years. It's 5 years, 6 years from start to finish before you have a reliable, solid result. We're just now at the end of that period of time. It's sort of that recent that these major studies now are showing HRVB does work for chronic pain. And that's based on the mechanism that I was describing before, that the reason that HRVB works is because it's actually targeting the dysregulated, or the cause, one of the causes of the disorder that you're treating. So it's a direct intervention on increasing heart rate variability, which is decreased secondary to chronic pain. So we're correcting what's wrong with the HRV with the intervention. So those are some studies in chronic pain. Chronic pain, there are different flavors of pain. And I do want to talk a little bit about migraine, because that's the new front, that's sort of the new, what it's being aimed at in terms of its autonomic or its heart rate variability component. So we're moving from chronic pain, which may be due to musculoskeletal, injury type of thing, knees, things that cause tissue damage, that cause injury to the peripheral skin, which have this secondary sensitization that is due to autonomic dysregulation or loss of HRV. So a person has an injury, a back injury, and it starts the pain becomes self-supporting or self-generating. as that pain becomes chronic, the stress response and autonomic features, including heart rate variability, become increasingly secondary. So you start off with a significant or a real tissue disorder that's a pain generator in your body. So you got real pain in your back or your leg or wherever the site is. If that doesn't go away, stress begins to build up. And as stress builds up, autonomics become important. It's no longer just the tissue, that part of the body, which is injured. It now is system wide because the brain is saying something's wrong. There's stress. I need to do something. And it generates the stress response. Cortisol starts flowing down. Inflammation begins, in addition to the original tissue damage. And that secondary stress level, which is whole body, system-wide, physiological, that is what's called pain sensitization. So while heart rate variability won't immediately or in any effective way relieve whatever's causing the back pain, it takes away all those secondary things. It sort of shrinks it back down to what it should be, instead of being something which now has all of these stress-related social overtones, including depression and anxiety, sick role, disability, loss of self-esteem, all of those things that come with an inflamed and broad-based system-wide dysregulation. The whole body now becomes dysregulated, not just the pain center. So that's the theory that is being shown, that what HRVB can do is take away all that widespread stress response to a single pain generator. And that's very effective. That increases well-being. It reduces depression, anxiety. It improves level of function. And it has all these secondary benefits. It improves cognition, and it puts you back into the best shape that you can be without directly affecting tissue. So it's not a treatment for a burn or a heart condition, but it's a treatment for all those secondary things that do occur. In many cases, pain sensitization can arise after the injury itself has healed. And that's kind of a relationship with migraine in the sense that there is no specific lesion that accounts for migraine. There are abnormalities in the brain that are associated with migraine, but there's not a specific tissue or pain generator per se. And so it becomes biochemical. It becomes at the level of neurotransmitters themselves that are causing a migraine type of headache. And that fits the pattern of the secondary pain sensitization from a pain generator, where the pain generator itself may be actually relatively small compared to what these huge secondary effects are. The thing about migraine now, and again, this was suspected, and there is descriptions of this as being as having autonomic features going back 20 or 30 years, but it was really unclear what was going on. What was it that was upsetting the physiological balance? What's upsetting the autonomic system to cause the migraine? That's what's becoming clarified. And it is at the level of a pain transmission. It's a gene-related condition. And the biochemicals that are involved are really now pretty clarified and pretty understood, so that it seems that migraine is a very likely target for an HRVB intervention. Now that's very surprising, because there's not actually a known pain generator in the first place, but because it has autonomic dysregulation features to it, it can be treated by re-regulating the autonomic system with HRV biofeedback, with breath control, and anything else that will improve the balance of this acceleration, deceleration of the heart rate. And that's very exciting. So the danger I run across, and I sometimes might fall into, is creating the impression that HRVB is a panacea. kind of fix everything. You snap your finger and it's abracadabra, and it's all good. And people dismiss it because of that. So it is more than that on the one hand. On the other hand, it's very broad spectrum. It really, it helps. It helps just plain old depression, just plain old anxiety. It helps PTSD, again, where there's no tissue pain generator in many cases. It's just really a psychological abnormality of the physiological system. And it still works. It still will help with that. So it's broad spectrum. So I like to say that HRVB is adjunctive to almost any kind of treatment and is single agent for many disorders.
So interesting. I've always been curious about migraines. It's something I have myself, and the number of treatments I've tried that have no effect. And this is really hopeful. And
so what are some of the treatments?
oh Lord, well, all kinds of different pills that you basically have to take it. It's the moment you feel it coming on, or it doesn't really work. Myself, I've done injections, daily meds, all kinds of stuff. But having an option that doesn't involve a prescription or pharmacy is exciting for me.
Right. Well, we have published papers that's called non-pharmacological treatments of chronic pain. And it goes under that umbrella term. This would be a non-pharmacological treatment for migraine. One of the key bad guys, causes of migraine, is this CGRP, which is a gene-related peptide located actually above the neck. And the reason why it has such powerful effects on migraine is because it inflames the meninges, the covering of the brain and central nervous system become inflamed. And that produces the sensation of pain from migraines. And this CGRP is a key player, a very powerful, a very potent initiator of sympathetic outflow of heart rate acceleration. Some of the latest pharmacological treatments are aimed at reducing the sensitivity of the CGRP receptor. In other words, you don't activate the sympathetic nervous system through this pathway because pharmacologically it's a blockade. And it has promise for sure. Well, HRVB really does the same thing. It is also reducing the sympathetic nervous system outflow. It's just not using receptor blockade to do it. So it's a different pathway to get to the same point, which is to reduce SNS or epinephrine or adrenaline in the body, and it reduces the outflow or the activation. It reduces the activity of epinephrine throughout the body, especially as it's related to the meninges, because the CGRP is located, a lot of that is located above the neck. See, the autonomic system is working throughout the body. It's very peripheral, but there are also lots of central nervous system that is involved in it. It must be so. It's actually controlled by central nervous system. So one approach pharmacologically is to attack central nervous system receptors, but the other is this HRVB is through peripheral control or self-control through breath on heart rate. So that's why. I'm sorry, go ahead.
When is it most effective? At the immediate onset of migraine symptoms? And what would somebody do?
You would do it every day. The logic or the approach of the pharmacological is you take it monthly. It's proactive or prophylactic. Mm-hmm. And you would do the same thing with the HRVB. You would just simply practice it regularly in order to reduce the overall level of sympathetic nervous system activation daily. And I can tell you, even if you don't have if you don't have migraine, it does work. It improves. It takes the good and makes them better, and it takes the people who have problem and makes them okay.
Mhm.
So it sort of is, it works at all different levels. And certainly these medications wouldn't do that. That's what I mean when I say it's broad spectrum. It acts at a wide variety of physiological systems, where the breathing is the pump, you might say. You prime the pump with your breathing, that creates this whole body response, which is beneficial because it reduces stress, it reduces inflammation, and it reduces the sympathetic activity. It just reduces what's called um, um, persistent sympathetic activation, so that you're in more of a calm state physiologically. Um, you By doing that, you simply, and as I say, it doesn't necessarily eliminate, but it reduces frequency and
Mhm.
severity, because you may not. I wouldn't count on HRV as being a permanent correction for CGRP receptors. Something may also be wrong, but what it does is give you the best type of, it optimizes your level of function. I could see a person, honestly, I could see a person using the CGRP blockade along with HRVB. That's what I
Mhm.
mean when I say it's adjunctive.
Sure.
There are a lot of things where you don't need a pharmacological intervention, and HRVB is enough to restore normal function or improve normal function. But there are some conditions where it's a good idea, to use pharmacological or use the power of pharmacy in addition to the HRVB,
Kind of
and
like
not
working
rely on
on.
the pharmacy.
Is there a shelf life? Perhaps that's not the right term to breathing HRVB. I do it now in the morning. All right. How long does that last? Is it like 24 hours, 48 hours? Is there
It,
any good data
well,
there?
very, very little carryover, but what there is an increase or improvement in the ability to shift or recover. The idea is that the more you're familiar and the easier you can shift into a coherent state, then the more often you do. So you do your breathing, and that's good until some kind of stress challenge or something occurs, but it's then easier to reinstate that. And so the
Hmm.
more you do it, now, whether or not there's a permanent or long-term carryover from practicing HRVB is an area of understudied research. There's a train of thought, and it's very respectable in my mind, which says that you actually do improve your baseline, that irrespective of all other challenges or responses that you might have, that your overall level of resilience and well-being is improved, all things equal. So if you go back to breathing 12 times, 15 times a minute after doing your HRVB, you're actually a little better off than you would be if you hadn't done that HRVB intervention in the morning. And it's not demonstrated that it actually produces a long-lasting or permanent change in your level of function. And it's not an easy study to do, but I mean, ideally, if you took a bunch of HRVB practicers who have been doing this for 15 years and you found a appropriate control group who was comparable in every way, and they just didn't do the HRVB, and then you did your measurements, would you find that there's overall a better state of physiological health in the practitioners? I don't know. It's not an easy test, but the theory says that, my mind is, it's maybe some, but not a lot. We're not going to make superhumans out of us. And as I like to say, no matter how much I practice, I'll never play center field for the Braves. So there's some limitation in what you or I can achieve,
Hmm.
given our individual level of function. So however much a benefit there may be in the long run, or that's long lasting, it too will be limited. But I don't doubt that with regular practice, you will improve your overall level of function. That's my belief.
Okay, so I'm going to walk down a path here, and you tell me if this sounds correct. Um, I practice HRVB in the morning. Come afternoon, I'm in heavy traffic, stressor, cortisol starts flowing. I'm able to realize or recognize what's happening, and I kick into my breathing again, and it
Right.
brings me back
Right.
down to a steady state.
Right. That sounds correct. That's exactly right. Is that it's easier to do that shift. Once
Mhm.
you're practiced at it, it's easier to shift or recover. It goes by both terms. Some call it recovery, some call it shifting, but either way, it's easier to reinstate that better level because you're more accustomed to the slow breathing, and you're more responsive to it. You're more aware of it. And so it's
Yeah.
easier to get it, to get
So
into it.
so awareness is a big factor here, but I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? I mean, how many applications throughout any one of our days can we apply this? Whether it's dealing with work stressors, bosses, deadlines, traffic, um,
Yeah,
you name
bills,
it,
bills.
bills,
Yeah, sure.
heated conversations with a
Right,
spouse,
right, right,
and you
right,
can
right.
kick into that and bring your level back down. That's
Correct.
wonderful.
And ultimately, it's been my experience that you don't have the stress response to begin with. So
Hmm.
whether it's your boss or your bills or whatever, you're just better able to manage it. And so you don't actually, it's more than recovery. It's actually resilience. It's actually prevention. And again, there's an earlier way I used to conceive of this. I used to say to people, and I still do sometimes, I think it's possible to be in physiological or heart rate variability coherence on the battlefield of Armageddon.
Mm.
And so maybe that's a little bit of but the idea is that there's almost no situation where if you maintain your self-control, you maintain your respiration, you maintain your physiological state, you can confront it, you can just go down that way, so to speak. There's no reason why not. It's because it's a top down control.
Hmm.
It's a top down control. It originates in cortical control. It originates in your ability um, to manage your emotions, manage your perceptions, and you do have conscious control in large part over your autonomic system. So you can consciously control your autonomic system irrespective of what the environment is.
That's pretty exciting and amazing. I
Well,
To
think
be put
about it.
in,
It's
yeah.
it's also common sensible. Why not? I mean, you don't have to go berserk when everything is you don't have to.
Yeah,
And when
if you
that,
stop the mind from kicking in and
Yeah, that's
going
right.
crazy,
But that's what
and
I mean
that
when I say
prevents
it's priming the pump, because
mhm.
when you start the respiration is just a mechanical process. And so you sort of get this bidirectional or back and forth between your emotions, your thoughts, your perceptions, and your respiration, and it sort of goes back and forth. So but you can enter the cycle with your breathing. That's just mechanical, and you then begin to you get the benefit of the parasympathetic from central nervous system, which in turn calms your thinking, it improves your perception, it lowers your emotional tenor. Well, that lowered emotional and improved cognition feeds back onto the heart rate. So now your heart rate is also going to slow down, or at least the this heart rate variability is going to increase. And so you get this feed forward in a good direction, where the heart and the brain are interacting to produce a more adaptive physiological state.
balance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I think
balance,
one of
balance.
the exciting things here is for me is, this is free, right? We all have this ability to tap into this. It doesn't cost money. There's no pill, there's no liquid, there's no drink, there's no, you know, this is just, it's super healthy.
Anytime,
Yeah,
anywhere.
anytime, anywhere,
That's
it's there.
that's right. It's free and easy. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that it's only a piece of a lifestyle, of
Mm,
a broader. So in order to really get a meaningful benefit, it has to be coupled with diet and sleep, and those things also are related, especially sleep. But if you still are doing things that are inflaming your gut, and your biofeedback is going to be limited, it's just not going to be fully effective. So you have to sort of encase this awareness in a broader context, this idea of whole health, and that's lifestyle. So it's not going to overcome if you're not also managing other aspects that are continually regenerating the negativity or the stress response. So you have to work on it from both ends. I believe it's true that if you find someone who has no awareness of HRV biofeedback, who has a very healthy lifestyle, you're going to find that they've got really good HRV. It just depends on where you get into the cycle.
Very interesting.
And we like to say, that there are lots of routes. Yoga, people who practice yoga have good heart rate variability without doing conscious breathing.
Mhm.
And so there are a lot of ways to achieve the coherence that comes with heart rate variability biofeedback. It's good because it's an easy point of access. It's an easy point of entry. But there are other ways to achieve it, even without being directly consciously involving it. And that's what I mean when I say, it targets what the actual, one of the pieces of the pathology itself, a direct intervention. And if you can get a benefit there, then the idea is, it should expand. If you like feeling that way, you like feeling better, what else can you do? Diet, sleep, and so on. Nobody can get away with, can have a stress-free life. You can't eliminate the stress. You can just improve your ability to manage it or be ready for it. So it doesn't reduce the stress per se, it just improves your response to it. And so you want to do everything you can to add to your body's ability to face the stress, whether you're a clinical population or whether you're someone who's looking for high performance or a person who just wants to enjoy life more. That's a part of it.
Absolutely. And you had mentioned that you have some personal experience having gone through some of the protocols.
Well, yes, I ran one of the studies at the VA. And my personal story is that when I started at the VA, my research mentor was very interested in PTSD. And at that time, the most predominant subject population or veteran population with PTSD were the Vietnam veterans. And he was doing studies with Vietnam veterans. And this was way downstream, this was decades after their service, but they had PTSD. And HRV was one of the variables that he was studying, but not the one he was focusing on. And I got real interested in it when I saw that it had, at least it was purported at that time, to have cognitive benefits as well. So I looked at cognition data from this population of Vietnam veterans. We weren't doing intervention with HRVB. We were just looking at relationships between HRV and cognition. And there it was. It was there. So that's what led me then to find HRVB. And at the same time, I sort of started doing it myself. Not that I was particularly clinically disordered, but I just really thought it. I thought it was, so it was good. And the whole mechanism of it made sense to me. I started practicing it. And nowadays it's as easy, it would be funny to say it's as easy as breathing, but it is. It's just, it sort of becomes a part of your daily practice. You just sort of do it a lot, and the benefits are clear. So I'm an example personally of someone who has enjoyed some of the benefits of it. There's so many anecdotes and research studies which show that whether it's musical performance or athletic performance or improved cognition, test taking ability, there's lots and lots of literature saying that HRVB or increased HRV does improve level of function and performance. Lots and lots and lots of studies. But my particular role has been with the clinical populations, with PTSD and with chronic pain. And so while I don't intend to actually get into migraine, except maybe as a collaborator, I think it's a natural extension. So as a clinician, as a helping professional, I see it as my obligation and as my role, and what I want to do is to bring this awareness to improve people's lives. So that's my role. And I do it through research, not so much through intervention. I'm a guy who likes, the literature and likes writing papers and likes collecting data and publishing data to show that it works so that other people either become aware through self-empowerment or go out and find a coach and do this same thing to help themselves. So I'm trying to help people help themselves with it, whether or not with a coach. But I do think that for clinical populations in particular, you should have a qualified and trained coach.
Mhm.
It really, really helps. But if you're a person who's functioning well, it's easily within ability to master and do yourself. So however it is, there are different routes that lead to the same place, which is improved well-being. And that's what I find really gratifying.
Jack, speaking of cognition, is there any indication or any research that would suggest that it helps elderly folks maybe dealing with some form of dementia, either pre or during?
Well, yes, I mean, it doesn't affect dementia per se, but um, there are a lot of people now using HRVB in with dementia populations to just improve quality of life. To sort of, but music as well. And
Mhm.
in that particular case, because one of the keys to the HRVB intervention or protocol is you have to have a certain ability to control yourself, to control your thoughts. You have to learn how to do that. And that may be beyond the ability of some people with a certain
Sure.
level of dementia. And so music, what I have seen and what I'm really gung ho on and kind of high on is that music for dementia will improve heart rate variability. And along with it, then just the overall level of, or reduce the amount of agitation and distress. And that's sort of beyond consciousness in many cases. People aren't aware of it, but it's very effective. And there's so many parts of dementia which are non-conscious. And, and so they will respond to stimuli. Well, I mean, it's really a no-brainer, common sense. Music makes sense to provide, but the mechanism, the way through which it works includes the autonomic system, a calming of the autonomic system, and that brings in the HRV. So it's a part of a broader approach to reducing not the level of dementia per se, but on the quality of life of
Okay.
people with dementia.
Is there any indication as to or a difference in the type of music? Is it familiar music? Is it classical? Are you aware of?
Yeah, I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's a particular, my guess is that it would be something that's pertinent to that person's personal life history.
Gotcha.
There is this, and if I can dig it up again, I know I have it somewhere, this wonderful video. It's about a 2-minute video of a former prima donna from New York City Ballet in advanced stages of dementia. And they show the change that happens when Swan Lake is played.
Mm.
And suddenly this person who seems so helpless, frail, um, just oblivious, performs. It brings out that non-conscious
Yeah.
connection that they have. And it is so powerful to know that at the non-conscious level, these memories are still preserved, even though there's just no awareness of it. And so that's why I say there's probably some connection or some optimization having to do with what their life history was or whatever their association to particular types of music. I'm a part of a team at Duke that is really actively exploring the use of music in the perioperative setting to reduce or improve outcomes and reduce opioid usage after knee replacement in veterans.
Oh,
And the reason
interesting.
I say that is that the procedure, which has been used clinically for several years, but not rigorously collecting data, has been to offer veterans a playlist of different types, different genres of music. There's R&B, classic rock, classical, a few other type country music. And almost overwhelmingly, these veterans who are having knee replacement, who typically are of the generation around Vietnam or in the 70s, overwhelmingly prefer classic rock for their playlist. So that's what they select. Now, these are guys who are perfectly functional and cognitively intact, but they choose that as their entree into autonomic. And the mechanism of this, I mean, the research is to try to relate these improved outcomes in opioid usage and self-reported pain following knee replacement is to try to provide the mechanism and collect the HRV data and show that it's a part of what this beneficial effect is, that the music is going through emotional regulation and in a more or less non-conscious way is improving HRV through calming the autonomic nervous system. But that's a reflection of the fact that the benefit seems to be associated with what music you like, what music you're associated with, or you prefer, your choice. I'll make every effort to send you that. I think it's very, very compelling.
That would be wonderful.
Dementia.
You know, to me, this is very exciting. I mean, I've been a big fan of rock music since second grade, right? And it's been part of my life forever. And I've never been able to put scientifically, because I'm not a scientist, but put a pin in what exactly the mechanisms are that cause the uplifting in spirit.
Right.
And this kind of brings it all together, right?
You know,
this is
right. Like Phil Collins. I can feel it coming, you know. Back in the day, which I used to just really go gaga over. I mean, it was just total wonder. It was just so wonderful. It was called a psychoacoustic response. A psychoacoustic response. And it didn't really mean anything, but it describes the way you felt. It was by listening to something which you had this incredibly wonderful feeling that came from it. So that particular tune and others like it does it to me every time.
Oh, that is a powerful song, right? It really is.
We can talk.
We'll set up another show, another episode
just
for that.
song.
Nice. So you know, we had, I guess, a question. You know, we touched on the curiosity about research being done on the effects of HRV while spending time in nature, forest bathing or tree bathing.
Yes.
And I think we had said on our last podcast or last episode with you that we were going to probably come back and touch on that. Any other thoughts on that topic?
Well, it's not that it's hidden or anything. It's just a little hard to find. And most of the reputable research on forest bathing has actually not been done in this country, in Japan. And there are several studies which are showing improved cardiovascular function and actually lowering blood pressure. And although I didn't touch on it before, I did say that the physiological response of HRVB is broader than just heart rate and breathing. It does include the whole cardiovascular system in a very meaningful way. So there must be associations between forest bathing, improved cardiovascular function, and an effect or a mechanism that involves autonomic system and heart rate variability. I'm not aware that that's been elucidated yet, but it seems convincing that under certain controlled conditions, a walk in the forest, and it depends somewhat on, it's a diurnal sort of thing. It sort of depends on the plant physiology, certain times a day and certain conditions. But there is an effect or benefit, an immediate health benefit in terms of heart rate and cardiovascular function from being being surrounded by forest. The mechanism for that appears to be a plant leaf exudate. It's called phytoncide. You can Google that, PHYTONCIDE. Trees have to fight off infections and inflammatory infections. They're not exactly the same as human beings, but there is an inflammatory pathway in human beings which responds to these phytoncides that plants exude at certain times of day, certain under certain conditions. And it's done, evolutionarily. It is to protect the tree from certain invaders, which would disrupt their physiology. Now it's purposely vague because there's really not much more detail to it. But I think it's going to prove to be a significant adjunctive behavioral. I was talking about lifestyle before. Diet, sleep, reduce stress to the extent that you get music, things like that. I believe, and again, it is so commonsensible that having access to green, to foliage would have benefits on human well-being. I mean, it only stands to reason, but there has to be a reason for that. It has to be a deeper mechanism, a deeper understanding of why this is happening. Although, many treatments are well accepted initially without knowing the mechanism of it. American Indians would chew willow bark. Why? Because it has salicylic acid in it, which is the same component as aspirin. So even though it was not known, it was understood through practice, through behaviors. Certain kinds of things are helpful or have certain effects, even though the mechanisms are not known. And I think this forest bathing is at that stage, that it has a beneficial effect. The mechanism is not scientifically or clearly elucidated, but I'm sort of thinking that once it's tested and once it's studied, that will prove to be the case, that the benefit comes from a reduction of inflammation and a rebalancing of autonomic nervous system.
I'd be curious to see if there's any research or future research regarding how tree bathing or forest bathing, if you take somebody from maybe the concrete jungle, a large city where there's very few trees, very few plants, and you take them and you put them in that environment under the right conditions, what the effects might be to their nervous system and to their responses.
Right.
Curious.
That's right. It would not be so compelling if just a walk in the woods made people feel better. But what would be compelling if you could show there was a demonstrable change in their autonomic nervous system. So that's sort of the difference. There's, it's not like we're saying being happy every day. You can be happy just by being happy. There's more to it than that. So, your brain is saying something, but you might not actually feel better. So I agree with you. I mean, that would be the base. That would be the beginning of a protocol design. You'd have two groups, or you'd have a group, say, who does not have access to forest or to foliage. And it would be a one group pre-post test. You give them a series, do a battery beforehand, look at their HRV, look at their well-being, use a number of psychometric instruments and say how you're feeling, kind of quantify that. And then I would say, once weekly or once weekly, let's say for a month, 6 weeks, at certain seasons, certain time of the year, you'd really want to control the, you'd want the walk to be about the same length or follow the same path, whatever, much as you could control, and then do a post assessment and then see if you can actually pick up a difference that could only be due to the walk in the woods, so to speak, all other things equal. And then you sort of have the basis for demonstrating that it was the walk in the woods that's producing these changes in the post condition. It's easier said than done, but that ideally, that would sort of be a design that would test this. And, the research that's it's out there, that's kind of what they do. It's just not so well controlled as that, to demonstrate that it was the walk in the woods that is producing the benefit.
Yeah. So the big takeaway from this portion of this podcast is go hug a tree, get out in the forest and go for a walk.
Yeah, and your nose will tell you. Your nose will tell you when it's good because it smells good. It's just, it's not different from Phil Collins. It's that same kind
Same
of
thing,
response.
yeah.
It's that same response that you get. I mean, you all are outdoor adventurers. You know that feeling. You know that
Yeah.
feeling when you just like your heart expands, your spirit expands from a view because of you're looking at a view, or it's that combination of the temperature and your feeling at the moment. It's the same thing.
Same thing. I love it.
Love
Jack,
that description.
yeah. As always, thank you so very much. I
Yeah.
love having these conversations with
Yeah.
you. I always learn so much.
It's so good for me too. I'm grateful for the opportunity to get myself out there like that. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Where can our listeners go to find out more about your work and what you're doing now?
Well, you can post it. I will send you. In fact, I already have. I've sent you a link to my bibliography and to my CV, and I believe that's on your. I've sent it to you. Is it on your website?
Yeah, I think we have it with the first podcast as well as
Yes,
we'll put it in the show notes for this podcast.
That's pretty much the best thing. If people want to contact me, you have my email. I mean, anyone who wants to communicate with me directly, I'll do my best, to get right back to you. And then you can look up my CV as well as my bibliography. And the way it works is that National Library of Medicine offers a bibliographic service to anyone. And so the link is to that bibliography, which I try to keep the most updated, So between the CV and that link, that should tell you about everything I've done. Well, I'm almost everything, some things are not on it, but
fair enough. All right. Well, you have an open invitation. Anytime you want to present some new information, you're welcome back on.
Well, let's do it. I've been offered a chance to be a member of the International Forest Bathing Association as a representative of my university. And so that's really where I'm going to kind of take things now as I move forward. I'm really interested in that. So we should get together again and discuss forest bathing and its advances now, because for most people, for so many people, that's just I don't know, it's a recommended thing. It's just something that I personally I love it myself, and always have been. I've always loved just being outdoors, and which came first, I don't know, but for me it's kind of full circle. It's kind of proving something I already knew was true. So I'm really, in fact, Casey, that would sort of be something I'm excited about is developing this relationship with this professional society. So, I'll bring you up to date as soon as I have something new to report.
I look forward to it.
Be excited to hear where that goes. Absolutely.
All right. Well, until then, be well, and we look forward to chatting with you again.
All right.